All right, hello. So here's the deal with this video and with class in general. If you are still watching these, then I'd imagine you're somebody who is interested in what we're studying and that you're getting something out of the things that I'm explaining. And if you were in class, I would just inflict it upon you and you could ignore me and whatever. But some of it would soak in. So those of you who are watching these, I would assume that you're motivated by more than just getting a grade. So for the one we're going to get into today, I want to give you some background. We're going to be checking out 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is a frustrating movie to watch only if you don't know anything about it. And I can't watch the movie for you, and I can't change anything, nor would I want to. What I want to do is I want to give you a little bit of information about the year, the time, not 2001, but 1968, actually, the director, and the movie. Like, I'll tell you the whole plot of the movie, but it's not going to change anything for you. Because I think that to appreciate it, which I think is what my job is to help you appreciate the importance of 2001. I need to level you up a little bit before you get there. And then I'm going to let Stanley Kubrick do the rest of the leveling up. Okay, so what I think you need to know before you get into the film is that this movie comes out in 1968, which, like, if you talk to historians love talking about 1968, and I don't know why they wouldn't, because 1968 is a pretty juicy year with all kinds of huge events going on. And I don't want to go through the entire 1960s, nor could I do a good job of doing the entire 1960s. But what I can tell you is there are about 10 really important things that are going on in 1968, including 2001: A Space Odyssey being released. Excuse me. So this starts with, and I don't claim to be an expert on all of these. I refreshed my memory on history.com just before doing this. The first one is the Prague Spring, which is basically the some more Cold War action. Soviets move into Czechoslovakia and take over some areas that had previously been part of the Czech Republic. So more Cold War tension between Soviet Union and the world. We've got North Korea years after the Korean War taking the USS Pueblo and holding those crew members in POW camps until we can negotiate them getting back. We've got the Tet Offensive in the Vietnam War, which is kind of the Vietnam War was made into a movie, which it has been, by the same director that we're going to watch today, Stanley Kubrick. If Vietnam was a movie, the Tet Offensive would certainly be one of the climaxes and one of the turning points, and possibly one of the reasons that we kind of had to get moved out, like we were overmatched. LBJ, the president at the time, who is not seeking re-election due to the quagmire that is Vietnam at the time. It's an unwinnable war. He is at the forefront of it. And he doesn't seek re-election because it's so bad that he's not going to be able to make it. We've got Martin Luther King Jr. Assassinated in 1968 by James Earl Ray. We've got protests by all people, not all people, but you've got the counterculture movement. You've got protests by students, by young people, by a generation of people who have returned from the war. You've got people who are protesting the war. You've got soldiers being vilified. You've got really huge strife in the country, unlike times that we've seen. People are more aware of what's going on from the nightly briefings on the news, and they aren't having it. They want to see a different world for themselves, especially, I mean, I'm talking about in America. There's protests all over the world, but certainly in America, and it's not just hippies or drug users or anything like that. It's certainly that in counterculture, thinking about a different way to go about things, but people aren't having it. People aren't having the this is the way it is because we say it is, which should kind of be the way it's going today. You've got Robert F. Kennedy, who, the brother of JFK, who is killed just as he's about to run for the nomination. You've got the Chicago Democratic primary close to home, because we've got one of those coming up this summer. We may or may not see that happen. But we have huge protests there, including the Black Panthers, taking action and not doing nonviolent protests. You've got the Olympic protests, which maybe you've seen the picture, which I'll post in here as well. Protesting the inequality, racial inequality, particularly towards Black people. And then you've got the Apollo 8 orbiting the moon for the first time in human history. I know the Russians got into space before us, but we in America orbited the moon before anybody else. And what this brings us to is 1968, the movie 2001 coming out, a whole year before we would land on the moon and before we would, get that one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, and all of that. And what it is like the people's imagination is just crazy about space. Like if you watch a movie like Toy Story, where you've got Andy who's all into cowboys and Indians and then grows up and like gets to spaceman and whatever. This is exactly what's going on. People are like their heroes are astronauts and that kind of thing. And people have, their imagination opened up. It's going to be like another 10 years before we get Star Wars or anything like that. So people are getting these really terrible movies. They're getting like these, The Thing from Space or the Blob or whatever. They're getting like these low budget movies about things coming from space and like eating your brain and taking your way of life. Okay. So people are thrilled about what's out in space, but people are also scared because why wouldn't we be scared of the unknown? Most of those movies are an allegory about communism. Like they're not exactly American propaganda, but the idea that somebody's going to come here and like change your brain and take everything from you and whatever, that's people afraid of losing capitalism. That's people afraid of losing their religion. That's people afraid of what the government is telling you. Like that is some propaganda. And I'm not here to tell you that you shouldn't be afraid that your way of life is going to be changed. But like there are some really good movies that come out during that time, but most of them are low budget. They recycled the same rubber suits of the monsters over and over again. And this is a time when people would go to like drive-in movies and watch 3, 4, 5 movies in a row because they're 90-minute garbage and people aren't there to watch a movie. So anyways, it's a social activity. Along comes Stanley Kubrick, who is this like deliberate perfectionist, kind of insane, crazy genius. But to be sure, like you don't want to cross him and you don't want to be on his bad side because he would melt you down, wither you. So anyways, Stanley Kubrick is this guy who makes these like pristine, beautiful movies, and he's making this space movie with another genius named Arthur C. Clarke, who writes the book of the story of this black 13-foot non-earthly material that shows up on Earth, and the local primates get close enough to it, they touch it, it sends a pulse through them, they figure out how to make tools, how to devour the animals around them, and they develop smarter brains, and they are able to like evolve and whatever. Fast forward to 1996, where we have found the capability to sense things on other heavenly bodies around us. We find this thing on the moon. It turns out to be another one of these monoliths, which of course nobody remembers because it's millions of years later. But we've evolved to the point where we can get to the moon. We touch it, it sends out a pulse, and then we kind of level up again to chase off into space after whatever it was pointing at us at. So, I mean, that's the story in a nutshell, but telling you the story is not spoiling the movie. It's just giving you enough to like hopefully whet your appetite, because this movie is meant to be experienced, not understood. Like if you're watching this the way that I tell you to watch Interstellar or The Matrix or Blade Runner or WALL-E or whatever, that's not the way to watch this movie. And that's what frustrated so many people about it. When it came out, it was one of the highest budgeted movies of all time. And so there were, premieres, and people wanted to know, like, what is the big deal about this movie? And so people turned out, you've got critics, you've got public who are fascinated because they want more space stuff. And they go to this movie, and of course it's a little weird, and you'll know when you start the movie. It's slow. There's not a whole lot of dialogue. There's no voiceover. There's not a whole lot of writing on the bottom telling you like what you're supposed to be getting. And so for large portions of the movie, you might just be bored. And if you choose to tune out and like check Snapchat and whatever and do other things, you might miss something. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. Like it is kind of slow, and it did bore me to the point that I fell asleep the first time that I watched it. And it took me a while to come back to it, but that's because I did some studying and some I don't like the not understanding something that is an important part of culture. And so I made myself aware of like, why should I care about this movie? And I did. And then I rewatched the movie and I purposefully paid attention to it and tuned everything out. And, after watching it a couple times, I really came to appreciate it, which I hope you do right away. So this movie looks unlike anything else. It's pristine. It's gorgeous. It doesn't look like a 52-year-old movie now. There are, of course, things about the fashion and the, people looking like it's Austin Powers and whatever, because it is definitely the 60s, and later they do try to come up with like what some Future Man type of outfits would be, but even some of those have aged just fine, because what you wear into space is what you wear into space now, pretty much. So, but the camera work and the lighting are brilliant, and the fact that there is no CGI, there's definitely camera tricks going on, but there's no CGI to be able to do any of those kinds of things is pretty remarkable. There are definitely parts where they use some computer stuff. I don't want to bloat this video on too much, but when you do see a couple little computer screens, I want you to remember that the computer the size of a room was used to make these little bleeps and blips, and like Atari wouldn't come out for years and that kind of thing. Like I can go on, I can go on because I do appreciate this movie, and there are like a lot of really insane things. But basically what happens is this movie comes out, people go to it, and like the big movies at the time were these space trash, as I said, but also like Westerns. Westerns were everything. Everybody, I mean, go back and look at the top movies in 1968. You've got some musicals and you've got Westerns. You got a lot of John Wayne, and you've got a lot of, sweaty dudes with revolvers, men being men and women being things to be won and whatever. And that kind of like, whatever. There's plenty of great movies that came out at the time too. I'm not saying they're not good movies, but this is a different kind of movie, and people went to it, and some people got it right away, and they're like, this is amazing. This is something completely different. And this is Kubrick is on another level. This is gorgeous. This is art. This is not a movie to be like consumed with a bunch of popcorn and sugar and whatever. Like, this is food for your brain. And then there's the rest of the people who are like, I don't get it. This is the worst movie I've ever seen. This movie stinks. This is horrible. I don't get it. And everybody who likes it is stupid. Like the kind of reaction that some people have when people show you something that's important, and they kind of sit like, I love that meme of like when you show somebody your favorite movie or song or whatever, and they don't get it, and you're like, you're an idiot. And they're like, no, you are. This is one of those movies that's divisive. It doesn't make sense, but it's not supposed to. It's supposed to be experienced. So here's what happens. This movie comes out, and people ate it up, because although I've just talked about how so much of it is like hard to understand and whatever, the thing that people were going to see, and the thing that you'll probably be bored by, is like the space life, the slow moving. What is it like to get a meal in space? What is it like to take the flight from the Earth to the moon, and then like go to the Howard Johnson Hotel on the moon, or to, what is the toilet in zero gravity like? How would the ships dock, and how is it that there's no up, no down? There's like, there is no up and no down in zero gravity. And so things would be upside down, but other people would be walking on the ceiling and whatever. This is what people came for. And this is what people enjoyed about it. Like life in space, just like when people started flying in airplanes, and you'd see in catalogs, like, this is what the people are, this is the bright and shiny future and whatever. That's what this movie did. It did show that, but then it kind of flipped the script, and then it turned into this really mind-blowing, much deeper story about all of humanity and about all of like man's space, no pun intended, in everything. Like, how do we fit among everything? Because this is a movie kind of about aliens that never shows the aliens, but there is a presence there, and there is like leveling up and different levels of consciousness and that kind of thing going on. And we only see what we see in front of us, but there's more going on. So the movie is very deliberate. Kubrick doesn't care whether you like his movie or not. So if you don't like it, it's fine. But hopefully the things that I've told you here will help you kind of understand it. And I mentioned some of the other things. Stanley Kubrick went on to make other movies, like he made Full Metal Jacket. He made A Clockwork Orange, which is another one of those kind of inscrutable, difficult, violent, actually, really super violent, and actually banned for years movie. And The Shining, and he made others. I don't want to go on about him, but the last thing I want to tell you, well, I want to tell you a lot of things, but the last thing I want to tell you is if you're about to push play on this movie, Stanley Kubrick, being an insane genius, didn't want to assume that you were ready to watch his movie, even if you had just paid and you sat down to watch his movie. What he wanted to do is he wanted to wipe your brain clean. All right. I don't know if you've ever been to like a fancy restaurant where they give you kind of an aperitif or an appetizer of some sort that cleanses your palate. This would probably not be a real tasty thing, but it would be something that, you know, if you had onion rings a couple hours ago and you had onion breath, or you'd been chewing gum or whatever you had on your breath, if you're about to experience something at a really not even fancy, just a really a great restaurant, good restaurant, like something with 3 Michelin stars type of restaurant, you're going not to like fill up like when you have a bucket of chicken and like 2 cheeseburgers. You're going to have a food experience, which is different, right? You can consume a movie, brain candy, but artistic movies are a little bit different. So Stanley Kubrick wanted to wipe your brain clean. So what he has is like this 3 minutes of discordant music playing at the beginning, and people sitting in the theater were like, hey, something wrong with the theater, there's something wrong with the projector, and like whoever's dad probably ran up and like, hey, I just want to let you know there's something wrong with the projector. There's nothing wrong with the projector, there's nothing wrong with the sound. Okay, it's going to be like 3 minutes of black screen while these flutes kind of play out of tune in this uncomfortable screechy music, because what they wanted you to do is to be thinking about nothing other than the movie. They wanted you to like, I need to get toilet paper and whatever. That's gone, because now you're like, what the hell is that noise? And it is supposed to be something otherworldly going on. And I have also in another video that I promise I'll try to make shorter. There's another video where I'll talk about like what's going on in this movie. Like I'll explain the movie as I understand it, which really shouldn't take too long. So there's going to be this music at the beginning. You're going to hear it in the middle of the movie because it's a long movie by 1968 standards. And so there's an intermission, and then the music will play again to like rinse your brain out. So when you went to the bathroom, or you got popcorn and candy and whatever, and you talk to a bunch of people, you're going to wipe that out of your brain because they're going to play that music again, and then you'll get back into the movie. I will say, if the movie is too slow moving and whatever, about the time that you, just before the intermission, like when you meet the HAL 9000 and you get out into space, heading towards the next thing or whatever, the movie does pick up. There's a little bit more dialogue. It is a little bit more interesting. You do get some characters that you'll be with for a while. And then I got to say, like, stick around for the ending, because the ending is brilliant, and it may not make sense, but there's really nothing like it. So I'm excited for you to get something out of this. Again, sorry it went so long, but I hope you just watch it in like 1.5 speed, which is what I do when there are movies that go on, or videos that go on too long. But you're watching this to learn something, and I guess I don't apologize for making it go too long. So I hope you enjoy 1968 and Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, because it is a real doozy.